Hey, today we're at the National Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana. I've actually been here before. It's a really good museum at 3 floors of Studebaker fun. This is a company that dates all the way back to the 1800s, so there's a lot of horse-drawn equipment here too, a lot of really nice stuff, a lot of rare prototypes. Nice museum. Let's go check it out.
The story begins with John Studebaker. He was a blacksmith born in 1799, and he eventually moved his family from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to Ashland, Ohio, in a Conestoga wagon he built himself. The family eventually settled in South Bend, Indiana. This is the Conestoga wagon that John Studebaker built around 1835. It still exists and the museum owns it. And believe it or not, this is not even the oldest vehicle in the museum's collection. I really like the blacksmith-made hinges on the lockbox on the side of it. It's really cool. His two oldest sons, Henry and Clement, started the H.C. Studebaker blacksmith shop. They got a big break in 1857 when they got a contract to build 100 wagons for the U.S. Army. Younger brother John M. joined the company in 1863. He brought some much-needed cash reserves. He had made a fortune out in the California gold rush. Did he strike it rich on gold? No. He made his fortune making and selling wheelbarrows to people who were hoping to strike it rich. Always be thinking, people. So here's the oldest surviving Studebaker company vehicle. This is a very nice carriage from 1857, and a very nice one too. Look at all the curved lines. Contrast that with all the straight lines on this more utilitarian-looking buggy from 1919. This is actually the last buggy that Studebaker produced. It wasn't all buggies, though. Here's a sleigh from 1905 marketed to higher-end customers. Next up, we have a hearse from 1863. I always like looking at these old hearses because since it's mainly a ceremonial vehicle, they really could go wild with the ornate carvings and, of course, interior draperies. Just a neat vehicle to look at. Next, from 1910, we have a dump wagon. This, unlike a modern dump truck where the whole back end tilts, there's a little chain-actuated trap door in the bottom of the bed. This next wagon was built for the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, where it won top honors for its craftsmanship. It went on to be displayed at the Paris Exposition in 1878 and was also displayed by P.T. Barnum for a little while. Next up is another display wagon. This was made for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and is inlaid with all of the various awards and medals that Studebaker had won over its history up to that point. I'm kind of a super fan of the Chicago World's Fair, so I was really interested in this. All of the metal on it that you see, aside from the tires, is cast aluminum, which was a very expensive metal at the time, and all the finest things were made out of aluminum. Anyway, a very nice wagon. This was also displayed at the 1904 World's Fair. So let's talk about some non-Studebaker built carriages. This one was commissioned by the United States government for the Revolutionary War hero Marquis de Lafayette when he returned to the United States for a grand tour in 1824. Yes, this was used by a general who fought in the Revolutionary War. Speaking of generals, from the 1870s, here's a Landau that was owned by General Grant, later President Grant, as his personal transportation. This was actually built by the Brewster Company that in later years went on to build a lot of car bodies. Next up, we have a barouche-style carriage. This was owned by none other than Abraham Lincoln. This is the carriage that he rode in to go to Ford's Theater in 1865. That, of course, did not turn out well. I consider this a really important piece of American history. Studebaker acquired this in 1890, so they've been collecting things for a while. Just a very nice carriage to see. Next up is a brougham owned by another president. This is Benjamin Harris's carriage. These last two actually are made by Studebaker. The last one is a Phaeton that was actually owned by President McKinley. He used that around his summer home in Canton, Ohio. And as I mentioned, this is also a Studebaker. There's some other very worthwhile horse-drawn equipment at the museum that I've kind of skipped over in the interest of time. But there's a lot of great stuff here to see if you ever visit. So let's talk about cars. Studebaker started in 1902 making electric vehicles only. And here's actually a very nice example from 1907. And you can see typical for the era on electric cars. This was tiller steering and very much buggy-like. Next door, we have an enclosed coupe electric car. This is from 1911. This had a top speed of 25 miles an hour and was the last year for electric car production at Studebaker. Next up is one of two electric vehicles commissioned by the U.S. government in 1909 to ferry passengers between the old U.S. Senate building and the U.S. Capitol. This moved in an underground tunnel where there wasn't really any room to turn around, so there's actually two driver's seats in the middle, one facing in each direction, so that the driver could just switch seats at the end of the route and go the other way. The other one is at the Swigert Museum in Pennsylvania. Studebaker entered the gasoline-powered car business in 1904 with cars like this rear entrance tonneau. They actually just built the body. The chassis and engine were all supplied by Garford, so this is not actually a true Studebaker car. In fact, Studebaker was a little slow to want to build their own gasoline-powered cars, so they started selling EMF cars through their dealer network. Here's a 1910 EMF, very nice and large car. EMF turned out to be a poorly managed company, so Studebaker bought them outright and they became a wholly owned subsidiary. Walter Flanders, that's the F in EMF, spun off to create his own company based on the EMF design, the Flanders car. Here's one here from 1912 that were also sold through Studebaker dealerships. EMF was gone by the time this 1913 Studebaker was made. Studebaker at the time was now making their own car. This is their first six-cylinder automobile. This is kind of neat. You see the little tank on the running board there. That supplies gas to that hose that disappears up into the innards, and here it comes out by the headlights. So those are gas-powered headlights from the little Prestolite tank on the side of the running board. Just kind of a neat feature. The side lamps here are just a normal kerosene. Here's another 1913, but this one must be just a little bit later because it's got electric headlights and then electric cowl lights up here. This is a touring car, and if you ever wondered what happens to a touring car in the rain, we've got these side curtains that they're showing very nicely here. These just snap in place along the sides and keep the weather off of you. By the time this 1916 Roadster was made, Studebaker had expanded to two product lines, a 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder size. This is the smaller 4, and from the same year, 1916, here's his big brother. This is the 6-cylinder in a touring car configuration. Here's a nice little touring car from 1920. This is also the last year that Studebaker made horse-drawn farm wagons, so they're still making farm wagons all the way up to this point. Here's another 6-cylinder. This one's from 1922. This features what's called a California top. It looks like a convertible, but that's actually a hardtop up there. Studebaker was making commercial vehicles as well. Also from 1922, this is unfortunately a children's hearse. Child mortality back in the day was higher than it is now, so many funeral homes had dedicated hearses just for children. Unlike the black ones that are used for adults, children's hearses are typically painted white. This represents the innocence of youth taken from us too soon. Studebaker's gained a reputation for rugged reliability. Here's a 1919 Big 6. This one has almost 500,000 miles on it. Obviously, it's been painted up for advertising purposes for that. Here's a 1920 Studebaker Light 6 SLS that's been stripped down and set all kinds of endurance records. Here's a 1927 Studebaker Commander. This broke the record for driving from New York to San Francisco and did it in 77 hours and 40 minutes. This is over 1927 roads. So eat your heart out, Cannonball Run. The driver, Al Jenkins, actually broke his own record from a year earlier. He was also driving a Studebaker 6 that time, too. But that's not the only Studebaker endurance record holder here in the museum. Here's a 1928 Roadster. This broke an endurance record in Atlantic City by driving 23,000 miles with an average speed of 65 miles per hour. I thought this 1924 looked weird from a distance, and I was right. This was actually imported to China and has special coachwork by the Shanghai Horse Bazaar and Automobile of Shanghai, China. Coy C. Goodrich was the Studebaker engineer that oversaw production in China, so the radiator badge has his initials, CCG, because, why not? Here's a 1925 Big Six. This one's got a siren up on the bumper there, so it must be some kind of fire chief's car because it's got the big accessory spotlight over on the passenger side, and then the red light over here on the driver's side. This is another one of those California tops. Looks like a convertible from a distance, but actually that is a solid piece right there. Just a big giant car here. Sticking with the theme of big and giant, here's a 1927 Studebaker President limousine. This actually features a glass divider between the driver and the passengers. And if you look inside here, you can see that there's some fold-down jump seats. Yeah, this is a 7-passenger limousine. Here's a 7-passenger sedan from 1929. This is going to be very similar in configuration to the limousine, except there's no glass divider between the driver and the passengers, so he's part of the family in this case. But if you look inside, here's the same fold-down jump seats that you saw in the limousine. Also a big, giant car. Moving up to 1932 for the Studebaker President, this is a St. Regis Brougham body style. Only 5 of these are known to exist. This has a large side doors for ease of entrance into the back seats. You can see those giant doors there on the side. Here's another top-line Studebaker President. This is from 1932 also. The 1932 Studebakers are recognized as a full-on classic by the Classic Car Club of America. So this is a very high-end and prestigious automobile. Next to it is another Studebaker President. This one is a year newer. This is a Studebaker Speedway President. Studebaker was starting to get into racing and wanted to sort of build on that prestige by using the Speedway name after the Indianapolis Speedway in the name of the car. The 1930s were also the time of the Great Depression, so Studebaker introduced this lower-priced companion car, the Rockney, after Notre Dame coach Knute Rockne, who was a Studebaker executive. Anyway, this is from 1933. Here's another President. This is from 1934, so we're getting a little bit newer, but still sticking with the very high-end flagship cars here, looking smashing in the two-tone brown. Here's a 1938 State Commander. That's a step down from the President, but just a wonderful modern design by industrial designer extraordinaire Raymond Loewy, who came on with Studebaker this year. Here's a 1940 President. You'll note that this has dual side mounts. By the 1940s, the side mount spare is almost like a throwback feature, so it's kind of rare to see them. Next door, we've got a 1941 Champion Coupe Delivery. Now, you might ask what a coupe delivery actually is, and to find that out, you got to find what is the special thing that it's got around back here. If you go around back, you see that the deck lid is removed, and there's a little pickup truck bed in the back. This is marketed to small businesses for moving light loads around. Kind of a neat car. So let's take just a moment to talk about trucks. Studebaker is well known for their trucks, and they made a lot of them. This is a fire engine from 1928, by the way. Anyway, they made a lot of trucks, especially during World War II. Unfortunately, the museum doesn't have a really large truck contingent, but they do have some neat ones. The 1937 Coupe Express, like you see here, is one of my favorite trucks ever. It brought car styling into the truck world for the first time. So it's like a car in the front half and a truck in the back half. Next door to it, we have a 1947 Studebaker M5. This is actually a very popular truck with them, and they produced them for several years. After that, we've got a 1949 2R series. This was another popular truck for Studebaker. I really like the white paint here instead of the chrome. Looks very workmanlike. Nice truck. Moving back to cars, here's a 1949 Champion Regal sedan. Next to that, we've got a 52 Commander Starliner. Throughout this period of time, Studebaker was really starting to lose ground against the big three. They were just running out of money. Here's a 1958 Scotsman. This was for the budget-minded buyer. Notice the lack of any chrome trim. This is in the mid-50s. Studebaker still did have some really great designs that came out. Like this one of my favorites. This is a 1950 Commander Starlight Coupe featuring aircraft-inspired styling, often called the bullet nose or the tank design. I really like it. This was followed up in 1953 with this very clean design by Raymond Loewy. This is a 1953 Commander Starliner Coupe. This was a design that won them accolades across the industry, but unfortunately it was really too little too late. Starting in 1950 and really accelerating about this period of time, Studebaker's slide was very quick. Next to that, we've got a 1955 President Speedster. This is the similar design, only we've got a much heavier chrome front end on this. By this point, Studebaker was looking at a merger with the Packard Corporation. This is another car company that was also on the ropes in the mid-50s. Merger did allow them to create cars like this 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk with a powerful Packard engine. This is one of the fastest production cars on the road at the time. The Golden Hawk was also released as a Packard, so there's a Packard Golden Hawk out there too. Here's a 1957 Golden Hawk 400. This is a limited edition. I really like the rear view mirrors further up on the fenders like that. I had a car that had them up there, and I don't know, it's just a nice feature. They were also able to produce some really sharp looking trucks like this 1961 Champ. The Champ truck kind of took its styling cues from the Studebaker Lark. Here's one from 1963, and you can kind of see the front end is sort of similar, but this was a kind of a late success. Another late styling success was the Studebaker Avante. This is also from Raymond Loewy. This specific one raced at the Bonneville Salt Flats, that's why it has the number on the side, but you can see the unconventional styling. This was made to compete with the Ford Thunderbird. Here's a 1964 Hawk. By this time, the company was really on life support, but they did manage to freshen up the old Hawk design just a little bit. It has a squared-off roofline that I think really evokes the early 60s styling nice. I like it. Here's another 63 Avante. This one is, of course, a speed car. This is the first Studebaker-powered vehicle ever to break the 200-mile-an-hour barrier. Of course, it did so in 1993. Stepping back a couple of years, here's a 1956 Studebaker President Classic, looking really sharp in the two-tone paint, top-of-the-line car here. The museum has a number of one-of-a-kind prototypes like this 1962 Notchback. This was a design study to try and incorporate some of the Avante features into the standard Studebaker line. This is an interesting car because on this side you can see that it's a four-door, although on the other side it looks like a two-door. That way they can review both body styles on the same car. This next car is the last Packard show car. This is the 1956 Packard Predictor. Packard was really done at this point, so this is their kind of last great hurrah. Just a wonderful futuristic styling. Those metal parts over the doors, those are retractable, so you have sort of a T-top effect when everything is retracted. Really nice. The back window with the backward slant, that rolls down. Just wonderful styling on the tail fins here. Just a nice car designed by Dick Teague. Another prototype is this 1947 Woody station wagon. This was actually planned to be added to the 1947 line, but was dropped just before production began. So the only thing that remains is just this pre-production model. It was found discarded in the infield of the old Studebaker Proving Grounds in 1980 and restored. Studebaker did land a few late contracts to help keep it afloat. This is a 1963 Zip van that they made for the U.S. Postal Service. Studebaker provided the chassis, and the body was made by a company called MetPro Products out of Pennsylvania. Efforts like this just couldn't save the company, though. What we have here is the last Studebaker that was produced at the South Bend headquarters plant. This is a 1964 Daytona. The Hamilton, Ontario plant managed to soldier on for another year and a half, but that shut down in 1966. This is the last Studebaker produced anywhere in the world. This is a 1966 cruiser from the Hamilton, Ontario plant. Studebaker Products Division was then taken over by Kaiser Jeep. Hey, let's take a little walk down to the basement of the museum where they got cars stacked up in racks. There's a lot of interesting things down here. With the outbreak of World War I, Studebaker got a big order for U.S. military ambulances. This is a horse-drawn ambulance. They used some motorized ones too, but the horse-drawn ones were just more reliable on the front lines. Studebaker also got a big order for water carts, like this one here. This is from 1914 for the British government. They built 500 of these, and they delivered just drinking water around for both horses and men. Kind of a neat little thing that you don't really think about, but is essential. Another thing that's essential are gun carriages, which Studebaker also made. Here is one of the wheels from one of those World War I gun carriages in World War I style camo. That's a really big wheel. Well before the war, in 1911, Studebaker supplied a large number of these wagons to the Turkish army. The small size worked well with the mountainous terrain that the Turks usually dealt with. Unfortunately, the Turks ended up being on the other side when war broke out. Still a neat piece of history here, though. Next to it, we have a much larger wagon. This was one that was supplied to the U.S. Army. This is a multi-purpose supply wagon. They ended up building almost 8,000 of these things for the U.S. Quartermaster Corps. So this would have been a common sight at the time. Speaking of common sights, Studebaker produced 10,000 of these water transportation carts for the U.S. Army. These are a little bit bigger than the earlier ones that you saw that they supplied to the British. I think these are neat because you've got all these spigots all the way around the edge so that the individual soldiers could gather water for whatever it was and just line up around it. It's a pretty neat thing. When World War II came around, Studebaker was again supplying material like this 1942 cargo sled. Also, this Pratt & Whitney engine. This is an engine from a B-17 produced by Studebaker. And interesting things like this 1942 Weasel tracked vehicle. And although not shown in the museum, Studebaker, of course, supplied a lot of trucks to the military. Here's a 1942 Champion Series 90. This is one of the so-called blackout models because there's no bright work. All that is painted black to save on chrome. This next one may look like a Jeep, but this is actually a 1982 M825 Mutt. This was produced by AM General in the old Studebaker South Bend plant. AM General, of course, then went on to produce the Humvee. This is a 1985 prototype. Hey, here's the 51 Studebaker from the Muppet movie. This was driven by Fozzie Bear in the movie, but you can see here that the actual driver would sit down in the trunk where you couldn't see him. They're soliciting funds right now to try and restore this back to its original glory. Here's an experimental rear-engine 1959 Lark. At first I thought they'd put a Volkswagen engine in there, but actually that's a 1953 Porsche engine. So, a common mistake. This super sharp looking station wagon is a 1962 Studebaker Skyview prototype with a sliding roof. Look at how much open space that would be. The sliding roof actually did appear the following year on the 1963 Studebaker Wagonaire, but this is a really nice car. Speaking of really nice cars, here's a 1963 Lark Daytona convertible. Here's another prototype. This is a 1963 truck prototype that was supposed to be a modular design, but by 63, Studebaker just didn't have the funds to pursue it any further. Next up, we have this really sharp-looking cab-over design. This is Studebaker's Ace truck. This is from 1936, and just a nice truck. Cab-overs are generally used in cities where you need a little bit shorter wheelbase and more maneuverability. Can't really see the cars up on the rack too much, but this one I'd really like to get a better look at. This is the Astral from the late 1950s. It was going to be powered by either atomic power or ionic beams. How futuristic is that?
Well, that was the National Studebaker Museum. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to mention something down in the comments here. Up here, I've got a link to some of my other videos that are also very interesting. And right about here, we've got a subscribe button. Go ahead and push that. It doesn't hurt. We'll talk to you later. Bye.